What's up, everyone? So, today I want to talk about a subject that's actually been on my mind for quite some time, and I haven't really had the chance or haven't really found a good time to talk about it until now because today's Super Bowl Sunday, and I just got done watching this video tweeted by Edward Snowden called Concussion Protocol. In the description of the video, it says, by the end of the 2017-2018 season, more than 250 players in the NFL will have sustained concussions. For his latest project, data artist Josh Begley tracked these injuries. Now, I like how he says data artist when really the entire video, just to save you some time, is just a replay of a bunch of people getting concussions in the NFL. It's just a compilation video. Like, data artist, there's nothing artistic here other than taking a bunch of clips and playing them back to back in slow motion. That's really the entire video. There's obviously a lot of things that I think the NFL has done that are very shady that I don't agree with. I haven't seen the concussion movie, but from what I understand, the NFL knew about head trauma, they knew about CTE, and they actively kept this information from the players, from the public. That is definitely not cool. I think if you're going to do any sort of activity that involves risk, you should have as much information as possible. If you're going to go skydiving, I'd like to know how often people die. If the skydiving facility keeps that information from me, not fucking cool. But once you have this information and once you realize the dangers of whatever it is that you're doing, I think you should have the freedom to do that thing, even if it can cause some serious long-term damage. So in economics, there's this term known as market failure. And it's a term that I'm not really that big a fan of, but it's something that people use a lot. And what's interesting about this term is that it's always used almost de facto with the assumption that market failures always occur on the supply side. So if you think about like environmental change or climate change and green products, people always say, oh, there's a market failure because we need to be protecting the environment, but the market isn't providing us the goods that help us protect the environment, like electric cars, clean energy, that sort of thing. So it's always assumed that the market can really only fail on the supply side. But in this instance, aside from the NFL hiding information, I think this is actually a scenario where the market is failing not on the supply side, but actually on the demand side. It's actually the consumers that are causing market failure. Now, the reason I say that the market failure is actually coming from the consumer side, the demand side, is because of the things that exist within certain sports and the perception amongst the public as to why these things exist. An example in football would be helmets and pads. It's assumed that these things are protecting the players, even though I think they're actually creating weapons. When you put a helmet on and when you put pads on, you actually treat your body in a different way that you wouldn't if you were completely unprotected. You throw your body in a way, in plays that actually put your body in danger. You throw your head into hits when you wouldn't do that if you weren't wearing a helmet. So it's kind of like you've created a moral hazard within sports. A moral hazard within economics terms being a situation where somebody actually behaves more risky because they're insured. So you get car insurance and you actually behave in a more risky manner because, well, I'm insured. Now you're not as careful when you're driving. Within sports, you give players pads and a helmet, and now they actually put their bodies in more danger than they otherwise would if they didn't have the pads. As to what would happen if you got rid of this, I don't really know. Some people think that if you got rid of helmets and pads, all of a sudden everybody who watches football just doesn't watch it anymore, which I think is completely wrong. I think if you get rid of helmets and pads, people still watch the game. The game's going to change, but I don't think every football fan is all of a sudden like, well, I'm not watching football anymore. One thing I do see happening if the NFL were to get rid of helmets and pads is that this would turn into a nationwide discussion. This would be on the news and not just on SportsCenter. This would be just news in general. So now you would have the average person within the population who doesn't even follow the NFL, doesn't even follow football, would now have an opinion as to whether or not the NFL is right or wrong to get rid of helmets and pads. It would seem barbaric to a lot of people because, again, the perception is that these things exist to protect the players when I think it actually makes it more dangerous. So you'd have this public outrage, this huge majority of people who aren't even fans, who don't even really know that much, that would say, oh my God, this is so barbaric. We're getting rid of protection. First, the NFL kept information from their players. Now they're getting rid of the protection. And this would actually kind of force the NFL's hand to keep their players in the current dangerous situation where they have this, quote, protection that I think is actually causing more damage than it's preventing. Another example of this would be the UFC or boxing. You know, the assumption from the public's point of view is that the gloves are there to protect the fighters, that it doesn't cause as much damage, when really I think it makes the sport insanely more dangerous. One of the most important things I think you could do for the sport to make it safer is to actually get rid of gloves. And I'm not the only person who thinks this. Joe Rogan, who's an MMA commentator, knows a lot of people within the industry, also thinks this, and there are other people in the industry who also think this as well.
I think people should have no gloves on when they fight. I think fighting with gloves is like makes it easier to punch people, which is more unrealistic. And getting kicked in the head is way worse than getting punched in the head.
It's
and we
the
allow
same
that.
Argument for Olympic headgear. That's why it's going away. They think it causes more problems than it's actually worth at this point.
I also think it's unrealistic in terms of like the limitations of your body. Like there's limitations of your body with punching people, and that's that your wrists bend. Like anybody's ever punched someone or something.
Would you condone tape or just raw?
No, raw. Like it's really kind of interesting because having your knuckles taped up and having your knuckles padded up is a real advantage for someone who knows how to hit things, because you could be like much more relaxed and liberal with your use of punches. You don't have to worry about hitting bones. We have a very accepted idea of what's civilized. One of the things is you cover your knuckles. It's kind of stupid because you don't have to cover your elbows. But people are smashing and slashing people up with their elbows. My case against it is that it's not logical. It's just historical. We're just going by a tradition, and it's not a logical tradition. But I really do think that the gloves I think we're doing a huge disservice to the art of fighting, because I think we have unrealistic expectations based on the idea that you could just punch someone with padded knuckles. I think if we didn't have padded knuckles, we'd be much more clever in how we use our hands, because you might break your hand at any shot.
But imagine if the UFC or boxing were to actually do this. Imagine if tomorrow they decided, you know what, we're just going to get rid of gloves. We think it's safer for the fighters. We think it's the best thing to do. This would, again, be some sort of like national discussion. It wouldn't just be news within the MMA crowd or within combat sports. It would be news in general. People would be talking about, oh my God, have you heard that combat sports are going no gloves? Like, this is barbaric. This is completely insane. This is so primal. And you'd have people who are completely ignorant, completely uneducated, who are just making a decision just based off of what they're seeing. They're seeing MMA, this bloody sport, and they're like, oh my God, now they're taking gloves off?
The problem is no one's going to agree to that, because people are going to, from home, they're going to look at it and go, oh, this is barbaric, this is horrible, they don't even have gloves on, they're bare knuckle.
I mean, there's even a saying for that, oh, the gloves are coming off in hockey. Like, as if that's creating more danger, when in reality, it's actually making things safer. So what do we do in these scenarios where the status quo isn't necessarily completely enforced by the companies themselves? It isn't entirely enforced by the NFL or by the UFC. What do we do in these scenarios where, hypothetically speaking, they say, let's get rid of helmets and pads, let's get rid of gloves, there's public outrage, and in order to keep the public happy, they say, okay, we have to go back to our old rules. What do we do in a situation like that when it's actually damaging the fighters? It's damaging the players. It's causing more harm to their brains, to their bodies. What do we do in a situation like that? We always talk about market failures as being on the supply side. What happens when the market failure is caused entirely by an ignorant public?